All right, good afternoon and welcome to the Newsroom Pub on this snowy day. I'm Milwaukee Press Club President Maryann Lazarski, and I'm happy to be here today with Milwaukee County's newly elected district attorney, well, maybe not so new, but pretty new, Kent Lovern. He began his career as a criminal defense attorney in Racine, was hired in 1998 as a prosecutor for Milwaukee County by then District Attorney E. Michael McCann. In 2007, John Chisholm, who succeeded McCann, appointed Lovern a deputy district attorney and 1 year later promoted him to chief deputy DA. After Chisholm chose not to seek re-election in 2024, Lovern announced his candidacy and was elected district attorney in November. Before we get started, I would like to thank our event sponsors. Our presenting sponsor is Spectrum News 1, and our supporting sponsor is We Energies. I'd also like to thank our event partner, WisPolitics. WisPolitics.com partners with the Press Club for this luncheon as part of its ongoing event series in Milwaukee, sponsored by UW Milwaukee, Wisconsin Transportation Builders Association, Medical College of Wisconsin, Commercial Association of Realtors, and Spectrum. And I'd also like to welcome our media panel today, Aaron Mabin from Fox 6 News, Jenna Ray from TMJ4 News, and Chris Ramirez from the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. Now, please welcome Kent Lovern.
Well, thanks so much, Maryann, for the invitation to be here today, and thanks to all of you for braving the elements and coming out here. I appreciate seeing all of you here today. As mentioned, I've been a prosecutor for 27 years, and so when people have asked me now in the last month, how's the new job going, I say it's everything I expected it to be. And that's in fact true. All the challenges I know the job entails, as well as the opportunities. And so, but I'm very much looking forward to that. I won't talk for long because I know the point is here to take questions and answer them. So, but just a quick couple points about my background as a prosecutor. I did a lot of work in the area of domestic violence, a lot of work in the area of firearms enforcement, work with long-term investigations, cooperating with state, federal, local law enforcement around drug gangs in the community, so I'm familiar with that. I've had a background on a number of nonprofit boards in this community, and so I understand the value of partnerships in the private sector, in the public sector, and how my view of public safety really incorporates a lot of the work done outside of the criminal justice system and what we can do as a community to make us healthier and have the potential for more prosperity. I've also been a longtime member of the Downtown Rotary Club, of which I'll be fortunate to be the president of upcoming this summer. And that has been a real education for me with regard to the private sector and so many other things going on in this community far outside my daily work. And I have, for now over 20 years, valued the opportunity as someone working within the government to intersect with people every place else doing really important things in this community. And that has also been very instructive in my mindset as far as how public safety applies in the entire community. And then I would just say, generally speaking, and I've said this now publicly several times, my general approach to crime is that violent crime, including reckless driving, deserves a strong response. And I've certainly, in the work I did as a line prosecutor, had my hands on a lot of things that required a strong response. I'm very familiar with what that means, and it ultimately means removing people from the community for some period of time in response to their transgressions. Having said that, I've also seen now over time that there can be effective strategies around these issues related to addiction, which we know is pervasive, mental health issues that I'm deeply concerned about, and those issues can be best treated in most cases outside the conventional response of the punitive justice system and really deserve a more therapeutic treatment level response. And so that's what I intend to move forward with. I would also indicate that community partnerships through our community prosecution partnership unit is something that we'll continue to make a high priority as well. And that's the work our prosecutors do in neighborhoods each and every day that's proactive, intended to address problems at the neighborhood level with neighborhoods and police, and we have found that to be a program that residents in the city of Milwaukee in particular have really, really appreciated. So So moving forward, those will be the things we focus on in our office specifically. My bigger concern for the larger community is that I think we need to work more from our sector with other sectors. I've mentioned the nonprofit sector, I think the private sector as well, because ultimately what we know is that people who have a higher prospect for a better standard of living, for stable housing, for family-sustaining jobs, all of those things, if we can build those in our neighborhoods, will certainly be the long-term solution toward ensuring the level of safety and security that all of us deserve. So with that, I think I'll stop, and I'll be happy to take questions.
Okay. My first question for you is, and you just touched on it a little bit in your address. You were talking about reckless driving. You almost kind of inherit a administration that's going to have to deal with this as a top priority. What kind of strategies you have in place, or what kind of things are you working on to address that? That's at the top of a lot of people's minds here in Milwaukee County.
Yeah, and clearly I heard from everybody I talked to, it seemed like in every neighborhood in this past year, that reckless driving, even in neighborhoods that are afflicted with higher levels of gun violence, we're talking about reckless driving. And for all of us, we've all seen it. We've all experienced it. And what that does is, aside from the safety concern it presents to us, it also creates and in fact reinforces the perception that we have a significant crime problem here. I think that what we have to do is we have to respond to these cases, and I've said it to my staff, to my legal staff now going back very emphatically about 18 months, when it became apparent in my mind that I may well be running for this job, when we have engagement with our legal staff around what the priorities are in this office, I have made an emphasis to them with regard to what the community wants, which is a strong response to that, meaning our recommendations. We prosecute these cases vigorously. We prosecute them vigorously at the juvenile level. We prosecute them vigorously at the adult level, level in the courtrooms. We do have to be making recommendations that are seeking jail or prison time on these cases. I just think, what is happening here, and you can't, years ago there used to be a term for this, they would call it joyriding. There is nothing about this that is other than an endangerment to people out there in the roadway. And when we think about how safety is compromised with that behavior, it requires a strong response. There's no question about that. Having said that, I want to make it clear, these are the things we're recommending in court every day. And as all of you know, I think, we have all three branches of government converge in the criminal justice system in one way or the other. And we are the executive branch bringing these cases and recommendations to the judicial branch and trying to make the case that these cases deserve a strong response.
We'll continue on the theme of reckless driving. I know it's a big topic for a lot of people. A Milwaukee County Court Watch group monitored more than 100 felony reckless driving cases since last summer. The data that it compiled and found was that 69% of the time, judges gave lighter sentences than what prosecutors had originally recommended. Do you think that circuit court judges hold reckless drivers accountable when they're found guilty? Two-part question here. Or is there an issue with Wisconsin state statute sentencing?
Well, let me talk about the Court Watch group first. I was introduced to them about a year ago when they were first making plans to come into our system and taking a look at things. And I met with them separately. Their question of me was, did I have any concerns about them coming in? And my response was, please come into our system. I want you to see what we're doing each and every day. I want you to see what our prosecutors are doing. I want you to see how complex sometimes the cases are. And I want you to see what the outcomes are in these cases. So I have welcomed the engagement of the Court Watch group, and I would like to see their numbers expand, frankly, because I just think the more the public sees about our system, the more we'll improve. I mean, it's very difficult in our system because it's already isolated because we're in a forbidding complex. It takes time to come down to the system to watch these cases. It's a tedious task they're undertaking, and I appreciate that they're doing that. What I'll say about what we're doing is, and what their report reflects is, it reflects what I have told our people to do, which is to make recommendations. And so I'll stand by those recommendations, even after the fact that we know that many times they're not being followed. I'm still saying to my people, even if your recommendation is not being followed in these cases, you need to take the same approach, and that's what I expect them to continue to do. And after that, it's obviously out of my hands, and then it's up to other elected officials to do what they think is appropriate. And again, I say this understanding it is an adversarial system. Even when someone pleads guilty to an offense, the sentencing proceeding itself is somewhat adversarial because all sides are being presented, not just the prosecution side. So, of course, the role of the judge is to consider everything, including mitigating factors presented by the defense. And I respect that entirely. We're going to continue to take the approach we're taking in these cases because I think it's the appropriate one.
Can we talk about, I don't even need a mic. Can we talk about your first month in office? Have you achieved anything in this first month? And
it depends on who you ask, I presume, right?
Yeah. And what are the first things that you want to knock out maybe in this first year?
Well, one of the things, clearly internally, I think we have an office that's very young when it comes to experience. I have 125 prosecutors roughly total, which is the number we've had almost my entire career now, 27 years. And over half of those prosecutors have less than 5 years of experience. So we have a very young office, and we can talk maybe at some point about the funding of our office and how that's challenged. So for me, I hired a number of these folks in my previous job in the office. So I'm familiar with them. They're familiar with me. So that whole onboarding process in terms of transition has been very easy. People are hearing, my voice a little bit more directly internally now about what I want to see happen. And I think I'm being fairly direct about that. And I think they understand that. And I think we are moving forward, with a good deal of synchronicity, I would say, in terms of what our approach is going to be, and people understand where I'm coming from. So in terms of transition, I'd like to say we're about done with that because I think we're, people are working very hard, and there will be other things moving forward that I want to see develop in the community as it pertains to an issue, for example, like domestic violence. And I'm doing some work in that regard right now with the community to try to lift up our efforts there collectively.
You do mention your voice. How is your voice different than John Chisholm's voice?
It could be just different. The fact is, I've worked in this office for a long time, and I have ownership over a lot of the work done in this office from the time I've been part of the administration. So I want to make that very clear. I think that some of it could be style, some of it could be personality. I think people might say that more about us than anything. But certainly, he's someone I admire a great deal, and there's no doubt about that, and people know that about us. But I would say that people are hearing from me a fairly emphatic approach and are responding to that in a good way.
Now, on the issue of staffing,
Sorry, I thought my voice carried. On the issue of staffing, statewide there is a very pronounced lawyer shortage. That's been a problem for going into more than a decade. However, it seemed to come to a head during the pandemic. And while it affects most of the rural areas more deeply, it does have a trickle-down effect in more populous areas like Milwaukee County, Dane County. And I know that also that there were strides made to fill some of those spots through ARPA funding, which is on its way to being expired pretty soon. What are your strategies in terms of recruitment and retention of prosecutors in this area?
Yeah, it's a good question. The staffing of our office is the number one priority I have in the first half of this year. As I mentioned to you, we have 125 lawyers approximately. That's been the same number for a long time. That's an effective number for the most part. A number of those positions over the years have been grant funded through federal dollars. 12 and a half of our positions right now are ARPA funded dollars, which when they came into us a few years ago replaced the loss of other grant funding. So it never really enhanced our office by 12 and a half positions. It has really helped us maintain that 125, 127 number that we've been functioning at for a long time. The fact is, we're going to lose those positions in the middle of the summertime. And statewide, the DA's offices elsewhere in the state will lose a total, including our 12, of 28 prosecutors. And so there's a combined ask we have right now of the governor and of the state legislature to ask the state to fund those positions. The state is the funding source legally of DA positions. across the state of Wisconsin. So we're asking for the state to pick up at the expense of those positions. Clearly, they're working hard every day. The state, in fact, has said that we need 4 more positions than we already have today. So not only, of course, am I asking for the 12 and a half to be picked up by the state, but I'm asking for the 4 more that they say we need. I would agree we need it, and I would never ask for anything more than that. I think the role of government is to give us what we need and not more, and I'm asking for what we need and what I think the state agrees we need. So the process for that is we've obviously made a budget request that's on the governor's desk, and the governor will announce his budget in the days ahead, and we are reaching out to legislators on both sides of the aisle to explain the need for why this is an important priority. I would say not only in Milwaukee County, but in southeastern Wisconsin in general. We need this county to be safe. We need to have a robust response to the crime in an appropriate way in this county, because as we know, that has reverberating effects everywhere in this region. And so I think this is a regional issue that deserves consideration, a great deal of consideration and funding. On the other side of it, you mentioned the defense attorney shortage. It's real. And when we talk about any sort of backlog that has existed since the pandemic, the main reason why we have a backlog in cases now is because we don't have enough defense attorneys. I've said this very publicly. Everyone deserves to be represented by counsel. We want to see that happen for a number of reasons. Number one, if someone's in custody languishing in the jail awaiting an attorney, that's obviously not good for them. Number two, we have victims on the other side of these cases who are also awaiting some finality with their case. That's not good for them either. And from a prosecutor standpoint, cases generally don't get better the longer they wait and linger in the system. So I want to see, a fully staffed public defender's office and, of course, private bar too. It's imperative for our system to function at the highest level possible.
How do we solve that problem of the defense attorney shortage? Obviously, you talked about, and COVID kind of put us everyone across the nation in a really bad spot when it comes to backlog, when it comes to you guys prosecuting felony cases. Where does the backlog stand? And is it a defense attorney issue alone, or is it a multifaceted, prong thing that, led to a significant backlog where, like you said, you have people sitting in jail waiting to either have their justice or have, victims' families brought to justice?
Yeah, the backlog now basically sits at about 1,500 felony cases behind where we think we should be. Misdemeanor cases are fairly caught up. What I would say now, there are literally 2 factors contributing to the backlog. One is the shortage of defense attorneys, as I mentioned and described. The other is, frankly, in the last 2 years, we as an office have put more cases into the system. And justifiably so. We've seen very high rates of crime here, and we have responded appropriately with an amount of an additional 1,500 approximately in 2023 and 2024 each year. So we are actually putting more cases into the system right now, which is an appropriate response. Most of those cases are felony cases, but the combination of those 2 factors has allowed that number of what we're calling the backlog. I guess what I'm calling right now is the new normal, frankly, because I don't know how long we can, call it a backlog. But clearly, then on the from the standpoint of we need to encourage more people to get into the defense work because it is honorable, important work. And I will say, I'm not sure I've got a great answer because a number of great defense attorneys who were, nearing the end of their career decided to expedite that retirement during the pandemic, and it's been hard to replace them. And a lot of them, of course, were highly skilled attorneys on top of it, so it's been a real loss, to be sure.
With 1,500 backlogged cases, how long are defendants who are charged with felonies sitting in the Milwaukee County Jail waiting to have a trial?
Yeah, it can be over a year at times for defendants right now, and that's not what any of us want to see, and that's not appropriate. And ultimately, and I think the last number I heard was in the jail right now locally, which holds, can't hold more than about 940 individuals. I think right now there might be about 170 individuals housed there just awaiting trial on a homicide charge. So, they're not going anywhere right now. And then you consider, we're charging thousands of other cases beyond that. So it's a significant concern.
You mentioned domestic violence earlier. I know that this is a topic very important to you. Can you kind of paint a picture on what you think is driving domestic violence in the city of Milwaukee, and how your office is trying to bring those numbers down.
Yeah, it's a critical concern from my standpoint. Some of you know for years I was on the board at Sojourner Family Peace Center, and I helped lead the entire project that led to the complex at 6th and Walnut, which is a national model. I'm very grateful to have been a part of that for a long time. And that was born out of the fact that, frankly, I could see as a young prosecutor, individuals, children growing up in violent households were often going out and offending as young adults themselves, or becoming victims of human trafficking. So it's a critical concern that exists in every community, not just in Milwaukee, of course. Some of the work I have already done, in answer to your earlier question a little bit, Aaron, was that for the last several weeks now, of course, I'm very close to Sojourner still, but I have spent time engaging with each of the culturally specific domestic violence providers here in Milwaukee, and we have several of them, and they're excellent organizations, many of them smaller, but very excellent organizations, and I'm trying to find out from them what they're seeing on the ground level, because we need more engagement from people who are in desperate situations right now. And my perception is that the pandemic, like it changed so many things for all of us, encouraged a level of isolation for people, encouraged people to stay in situations because they had to financially that were detrimental to their safety. And many of us didn't hear from victims who later became homicide victims. This is something we noted in the last 2-3 years, where we saw these high numbers of homicides, domestic violence related. Many of these victims were not in contact with my office, or were not in contact with one of our service providers in the community. That's a problem. And we have to figure out a better way of engaging with victims. And so, I can't say I have the best answer yet, but what I have said to all of these providers, and we have to work on it together, and somehow maybe raise the level from a community awareness standpoint of what we need to do for women and children who are in very difficult situations right now. Because right now, we need them to access the services, because statistics show, even in our local agencies, that if you access one of these providers, your prospects for survival are almost 100%. I mean, that's really the case. And it's something that we need to figure out a better way to connect with those right now in our community who feel isolated. It's a high priority.
My question centers around feelings. Statistics have come out from MPD saying that crime is down. The Wisconsin Policy Forum came out with a report just maybe 2 months ago that said arrests have been down. Yet polls have shown, particularly during the presidential campaign, that people were still feeling unsafe in Milwaukee County. As in one poll we cited at the Journal Sentinel, as many as 50% of people were fearful of the potential for them to be the victim of crime. Coming into this office, heading this office, how are you going to address that? I mean, you have statistics that show crime is down, but then people don't feel it. They don't feel safe. They don't feel secure. What are you going to do in your first year, policy-wise or however, to address that kind of concern?
Yeah, perception drives reality. I think we know that in any line of business or work or any endeavor. And so, and I heard it loudly and clearly last year from people living in every neighborhood in this community, that they just felt unsafe. They were concerned about this. And so, it is important, as we all know, everyone in the journalistic field can appreciate this. When you have facts, it's important to talk about what the facts are, whether they're negative or positive, and there are things trending in the right direction here. There's no question about it. Having said that, I can tell you, having been in the system a long time, we're still at high levels from a historical standpoint. So we have work to do. There's no question about that. And I think we just have to keep messaging that, number one. I think I have to keep saying what we're doing as an office to combat this, and what our responses are in court, and what we can do in the community to help solve problems at a local level. So we have to show a high level of engagement. And then I think we need to develop stronger, more visible collaborations in this community across all sectors, so people can see that everyone in the public sector is working as hard on this and as coordinated as possible and that, in the private sector as well, that has a lot of interest in this space. We're working on the same priorities together at the same time. There's a lot of good discussion in that regard, too. I don't want to suggest there's not. There is a lot of good discussion right now about that, and I think people will see a lot of coordination moving forward. So people need to see, I think, that their government's working hard at this, and that there's a lot of good work in collaboration with the private sector as well. And the numbers will continue to move. Already we're seeing, again, it is very early right now, but the first month was, again, saw trending improvement in the right direction. So we just have to keep working very hard at it.
Obviously, you talked about your past and working under former DA John Chisholm. You worked under him for a very long time. A large criticism of his office was that he was not tough enough on crime. How do you plan to differentiate yourself as the district attorney and be tough on crime from, compared to his time?
Yeah, honestly, I think that, look, we know who the one district attorney is if we're paying attention to the court system, but we had the discussion a few minutes ago about reckless driving and what happens in courts. I honestly think John bore the criticism for an entire justice system, to be honest with you. I mean, I think that, and that's not for any one person to bear and not just one branch of government to bear at the end of the day. We're all responsible for this, and a lot of us have a stake in this, and there are a number of us involved who ask to be involved in the system to make decisions about what happens in the cases that come into the system. So, again, part of what so it's one reason, frankly, I wanted to invite the Court Watch folks, encourage them to come into our system to see what is happening and to report back to the community what it is they're seeing. I think it is important for people to understand. And look, if decisions made under my name that is something that I own responsibility for, and I will own responsibility for every one of those, whether I agree with those decisions or not, I'll own that responsibility. Just think it's important for the public to understand how the whole system really works day in and day out.
I want to talk about the building that you work in. I know just a few days ago you gave the media a tour. Can you kind of paint a picture of the challenges that you face working in what is called an outdated building and what you want people to know about your effort to build something new?
Yeah, well, it is a crumbling structure. There's no question about it, and many of you in this room have probably been in it. And if it's been a few years since you've been there, I can assure you nothing has changed. What I will say, though, from the standpoint of the difficulty of the job, is that it wasn't built to be what it is today. And so for those of you who have not been in there, we have very narrow corridors, for example, that walk right outside our homicide courts and all our violent crime courts. And there's no separate places for people to walk if you're the family of someone charged with a serious offense, or you're the victim and their family, or there's no place for defense lawyers, to talk to their client unless they can find a dumpster to put all their paperwork on and literally talk to them down the hallway. I mean, that is the reality of how justice is being meted out every day in a large city with serious cases with significant consequences. And the sheriff's department said at that event, they've responded to over 800 incidents in the criminal courts throughout the year. Our investigators jump in on some of those to help. And that's an environment that is just not conducive to the output we need from the system. These are serious cases. They deserve a forum that takes them seriously, and also where people can feel safe coming into the system, and for jurors alike. We had a case just in the last week where a juror was punched by a family member after a guilty verdict. I mean, this is appalling, and we need I think the environment contributes greatly to the level of inappropriate behavior we're seeing there right now.
Let's see. One other thing I'm going to put you on the spot here. Is there anything you could tell us that you could reveal in the Maxwell Anderson case at this time?
No. It's a pending case at this time, so I'm not able to talk about pending cases.
I still had to ask.
Fair enough. That's okay.
It's a very high-profile case,
Yep.
and again, it's one that people have been quite questioning us about, because there's frankly a lot of information we just don't know, and the audience's interest in this case, not just here in Milwaukee County, not here in Wisconsin, but nationally, have been. people have asked, and I know it's a very difficult case to get around, but journalists still have to ask these kinds of
No, I understand. Look, the trial is set in May, and we'll be ready to go in May. And, I would anticipate questions being answered during the trial process.
I'll follow that and put you on the spot with something else. On a week and a half ago, TMJ4 broke the story about the city's housing authority misusing nearly $3 million. The housing authority's own CFO called this misuse of federal funding illegal. Is the DA looking into this, and will criminal charges be brought against the people who were responsible for this alleged illegal use of federal funding?
What I can tell you is there's nothing been presented to our office at this point in time.
I don't have a case for you. I don't. What's your greatest challenge right now?
Well, we have two. The external challenge is the one we're all concerned about, which is the safety of our community, right? That's foremost in my mind each and every day. And the internal challenge is making sure our office is adequately staffed. I mean, at the end of the day, we need people to do the job. And that is our most important internal challenge. And I don't even want to think about. People are asking me how I feel about the process, and I'm nothing but optimistic about it. I expect that everyone will come through with what this community needs, because the alternative, if we lose 10% of our legal staff, is not something I care to spend time thinking about right now.
One more question for you, and this may be a no answer as well. But yesterday we found out.
Give it a shot.
Yeah, why not? Hey, yesterday we found out that 3 of the 4 men accused of killing Devontae Mitchell took plea deals. Is there anything that you can detail about the plea deals that were taken? I know the hearing's in March where they'll officially plea, but any details that you can share with us?
Not at this time. Okay.
Anything else you want to add that we didn't ask you?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, the hard questions are coming here. Does anybody have a question?
Yeah, you mentioned that you're seeking funding from the legislature for these 12 positions. Are you seeking anything else from the state legislature in terms of legislation, and how is it being received?
Yeah, I'm actually, my ask really at this point relates to the staffing of our office and to ensure that public defenders and prosecutors both continue to receive pay raises that are commensurate with the work they're doing. So it's really related to those issues. I don't have at this point an agenda with regard to any law changes at this point. Occasionally, we may get asked about things that legislators have questions about. I'm of course always able to, happy to offer my opinion about some things that we see as enhancements if legislators are predisposed to moving on them. The paramount concern for me is the staffing and the funding of our office.
It appears that the state office building on 27th in Wisconsin is going to be a real deal based on some compromise and partnerships that involve public and private interests and revenue streams. Do you have any thoughts about whether a public-private model with revenue streams could apply to your public safety building in terms of creative framing that would get state support and maybe private support as well?
Yeah, I mean, I assume that's a possibility. I think, of course, right now, there could very well be, an assortment of places in which to look, but we know the price tag's high, and we know it's, a lot of state work is happening, of course, in our building with state employees, and so I think it's certainly a priority ask of the state to certainly contribute to what we're looking for. Beyond that, I think the county executive is probably a better person to talk about what the, other opportunities could be out there, but I'm sure there, other things are being considered, I would guess, too.
Given the Trump administration's focus on spending cuts, are there any federal grants that your office has pending, has applied for, that you're concerned will be cut off? And if so, what would be some of those grants and how would they be used?
Yeah, good question. We're watching that very carefully because, as I indicated, about 25 to 30 of our lawyers, and that's aside from the ARPA-funded positions I've already talked about, are federally grant-funded. And so, it's interesting how federal dollars come into local criminal justice systems related to things like drugs and child neglect and termination of parental rights. I mean, so The short answer is yes. Certainly, we've seen funding over the years related to our domestic violence advocates in our office who work with victims. That we receive grant funding through that as well, and we also receive funding into the local, block grant funding, of course, is often federal dollars, and what that does is fund most of our community prosecution work right now are coming from block grant dollars, starting at the federal level. So, again, we're just watching it at this point in time, but we do get, we have sources of funding this office from a lot of places other than the state, interestingly enough.
I'm sorry, just one
Yeah.
follow-up question.
Yeah.
Of your office's budget, roughly what percentage comes from federal grants?
About 25% of our attorneys come from federal grants, and we have a handful of support staff. I have about 175 county employees, support staff, and I think about 8 to 10 of those are federally grant funded right now. Thank you.
Your dance partner in this whole process is the judiciary, and over the last decade, maybe, it seems we've seen the expectations and kind of the framing of the judiciary and judge races and that change pretty dramatically. Is that having any impact on you and your department and your interactions there with the kind of a more politicized expectation level of the judicial branch?
Well, that's a good question. I don't, I think, and having been in the system for a long time, I think we just see there are judges who have philosophies about how decision-making and decision-making with regard to criminal cases ought to happen. And I guess I would say that, and I can remember this from early in my career, you always knew judges who would always follow the state's recommendation, and you knew judges who almost never would follow the state's recommendation. And you also knew judges who almost always exceeded the state's recommendation. So I guess I would say that if anything we're seeing right now, perhaps maybe fewer judges right now that will follow a recommendation we make than maybe I saw earlier in my career, I guess, is what I would say. I think that that's a, philosophical approach that, obviously some, we hear more publicly, maybe expressed in courtrooms about certain types of cases and priorities for what we ought to charge or what we ought to bring into the system. And look, I'm mindful, I will say this, I'm mindful of how dollars ought to be used and what I think are important usages of the dollars that are spent, and they're very expensive dollars, as I think you all know, with regard to for incarceration and for removing people from the community. But unfortunately, that's the suitable response for the types of crime we're seeing that are at a violent level and hurting people. And so I'm not shy about saying that. At the same time, I am all too happy to advocate for the types of treatment alternatives that I think, and we have seen in our office, actually work very well with regard to diversion. So that's my philosophy on it, and we're going to be just going to have to continue to be very consistent with that and consistently express that, regardless of who's on the bench in the respective courtrooms in which we're staffing.
This morning in the Wisconsin Examiner, in partnership with Type Investigations, we had a story come out that looked at the Milwaukee area investigative team, and essentially the investigation found that various aspects of the team's protocols for how they interview officers could be interpreted as kind of skewing the investigation in the officer's favor, in that the officers are only interviewed as witnesses or victims. They basically can't be forced to give a recorded statement, and most of the time they don't. And then other times we found that MATE's policies also weren't being followed, such as officers not being separated at the scene to prevent contaminating statements. We also found cases where officers changed their stories, and then meanwhile there are different MATE agencies that participate in monitoring or surveillance of families of people killed or who die in incidents involving police, sometimes for little more than just speech, it seems. So I'm just curious, you talked about earlier about kind of opportunities for change or reform, and I was just curious, do you see any opportunities for change or reform with the Milwaukee area investigative team, and also maybe making the team a little bit more transparent and accessible to the public?
So let me first say, I haven't had a chance to read the article yet, so I obviously would like to do that. What Isaiah is referring to is the Milwaukee Area Investigative Team was created about a dozen years ago now under state law. The idea is that a police department cannot investigate itself when one of its members is involved in a use of force that results in the death of a civilian. And so the law enforcement leaders in this county, the police chiefs of this county, put together the Milwaukee Area Investigative Team, which includes members of many of the law enforcement organizations here in town, the police departments. They're police officers, many from the suburbs, some from MPD, obviously. I believe the sheriff's involved, and outlying, now it's spread to some membership in Waukesha County as well. And so the idea is that they work a schedule and they respond to a scene then, and they are the primary lead investigators of a scene in which there is a civilian fatality because of an officer's use of force. So that article would refer to the steps taken at that time by that investigative team and the aftermath of that. So what we see, what I can just say generally at this point is generally what I see happen and what our role is in it. Generally what happens is at the scene, there's a quick statement given by the officer, any officer who used force, and it's not a lengthy statement, it's not an interrogation, it is a brief summary of who has used force and who might be armed still, and it's called a public safety statement. The idea is for the officer to give a quick appraisal of whether the scene is live or whether it's no longer live, in the sense of anyone being armed with a weapon, and what types of casings to look for and things like that. Beyond that, then, the mate officers assigned to that particular incident then lead the investigation. They're assisted by as many other officers as need be. Our office is not involved in this process any longer. Years ago, we would have more of an investigative role. We no longer do after the change in the law. And so the investigations then move forward with the gathering of evidence, just like in a homicide scene. So that would be the collection of evidence. And at some point, officer statements are taken within some period of time of the incident, often not that night, sometimes within just a few days, and sometimes even longer than that period of time, that an officer does give a statement to investigators related to the use of force. That's what generally is the approach. And then at some point, once the investigation is completed, we then receive the case from the investigative agency and make a decision about whether, and our decision making is fairly narrow. It relates to whether a crime was committed. We don't really make decisions after that about whether there could be a civil action, for example, based on the use of force, whether there's some sort of rules violation because of anything related to the incident. Our review of it is very narrow, answering the question of whether a crime was committed by the officer in the use of force. And that's the process. I mean, I'm happy to answer more at some point with you about that once I have a chance to read the article. Okay? Yeah.
Is that report from that investigation, is that public?
It becomes what actually does happen, and it is interesting. The investigative reports do get released publicly after our decision. So you actually can file, it's through an open records request, but from the investigating agency, and all of the investigation undertaken by that agency. And then we'll often release, some letter. It's not a detailed report often. It's more of a letter summarizing our findings about the investigation itself. So if you really wanted, though, to see the products of the investigation, you could the public could receive all of that afterward, including body camera. What's also developed here that's just in keeping with the times has been the release of body camera video of these incidents, and maybe some of you have seen there's been discussion about what's the right time to release video of these incidents. They're very serious. They're among the most serious that we see in our community, so of course the public has an interest in having an idea of what happened. And so the standard is becoming, certainly at MPD, to release a video summary of the body camera relevant to the incident. Usually that's happening now within 15 days of the incident.
Okay. Oh, do you have a follow-up?
I was going to go a different direction. Go ahead. You mentioned earlier that a lot of the attorneys in your office skew younger. They're in their first 5 years of practice. Do you see improving retention as one of your priorities? And if so, what can be done to improve retention?
Yeah, I'll tell you that we have had like about a 15% attrition rate every year now, going back a number of years, and that's due to the salary structure. Public Defender's Office is the same way. The Badger Institute a couple of years ago did a really comprehensive report on this. There's been other reporting done, of course. The Public Policy Forum did as well, I believe, around comparing prosecutors and public defenders to other government attorneys in the state. And we're still at the lower end of the spectrum. So that's a continued concern. You know, it's interesting. We have no problem recruiting people who want to come work here. People want to come work in the Milwaukee County DA's office. In fact, I have to say, I'm still always appreciative of the level of talent we get and enthusiasm, and we have a great relationship with the Marquette Law School and an internship program that certainly feeds some students in through that program. It's an ongoing concern because what we still see is, even with some of the pay increases we have seen, we need that continued investment by the state, because what happens inevitably is after a few years of doing work they really love in our office, the reality of life sets in and they need to find a higher paying job. And so that is a goal of ours. You know, what I can do about it is continue to advocate for, you know, the level of pay that people deserve to do this very tough work. And it is tough work. And at the same time, you know, I'd like to think we create an office environment that's collegial, that's supportive, and you know, we want people doing this work who want to be here and who want to be in this community, because it's important for people to want to serve the Milwaukee County area, and we have that. We have a lot of it. We have an abundance of it, and now we also have an abundance of alums in this area in the larger legal market. Who I say we've got, you know, several all-star teams of alums from our office, and they're doing good things in the community too. I think that's great that they started in our office, but I would very much like to retain on a more consistent level the talent that we're bringing in.
I'd like to go back to reckless driving for a minute, because Jeff Mayers would think I'm slipping if I didn't somehow work transportation in. But we talked earlier, you know, before the presentation about some of the, shall we say, innovative things that we're doing on our streets now in the name of safety. Have you seen, and maybe it's too early, but have you seen any dividends or any impact of some of those calming or disrupting, you know, things we've been doing on our city streets, either positive or negative in terms of actual reckless driving?
There is a decline in reckless driving incidents that has occurred in the last year, 18 months. So that's certainly true. I think that I think I did see something, and the city would be a better source for this, but I think the local. There was a local study done about speeding, you know, how people were driving. They were measuring the speeds of people on some of the major city thoroughfares in which there had been build-outs, and I think they were measuring fewer incidents over a certain speed limit, or that the average speed on some of those streets is actually going down. So at least I'm hearing it appears to be having a positive effect.
This will be our last question.
I wanted to ask about addiction related services and policies. So I was curious what the, okay, so there's kind of an issue with when it comes to charging people with reckless homicide related to overdoses, in that we do see news reports from time to time, and I hear anecdotally from folks who are either in treatment or struggling with addiction, that even although those laws are kind of supposed to be geared towards kind of holding dealers responsible for overdoses that may be linked to their products, that people who are co-using are getting are more often getting those types of charges. And we've had reckless homicide bills from the Republican Party kind of try to go through the Capitol, and when they're asked about, do you want to carve out a protection for people like a boyfriend or a girlfriend who may, like partners, for example, like spousal partners who may be using together, they both nod off, one wakes up and the other's dead, and now the survivor is getting charged with reckless homicide because maybe they went out and got it for them or something. Is the DA's office concerned about that sort of issue, and what kind of mitigating practices do you do or can you do to make sure that people aren't caught up in that.
So it's the investigation of someone who dies of an overdose is often a very complex one, and we don't have a large number of these that come into our office every year because it is a labor-intensive investigative undertaking by a police agency to even figure out, because so many of the individuals who die of an overdose might have multiple sources of the drugs that ultimately contributed to their death. The other factor related to this is that often an individual can have more than one type of narcotics in their system then after their death is examined at the crime lab, and so then putting the pieces together about what the source of that drug was and whether that drug was, what was the drug that actually killed the individual. All of those things are difficult. I'm just saying this to you all because we have hundreds of overdose deaths. Fortunately, that's going downward too. We're heartened to see that. But we have a relatively small number of investigations done by the police brought to our office. So we see a handful of these every year. I can tell you that sometimes we issue a charge of reckless homicide where appropriate. Sometimes what we have is a felony charge of possession with intent to deliver or delivery of a controlled substance because we know there was a drug transaction prior to the death of the person who was taking the drugs, but we don't know for sure that those drugs killed the person. So we respond to it. I can't say that I can recall I actually looked at a number of these cases just very recently. I can't say that I noticed that we charged a spouse or a partner. Have we charged someone who was a friend? I'm sure that's happened, or an associate. But the fact is that from our standpoint, it's dangerous activity, and some people do know. Maybe some of you noticed here just a couple weeks ago, we ended a long-term investigation by arresting 19 people who were involved in trafficking narcotics in this area, and it was a big deal because they were trafficking fentanyl. Okay, fentanyl kills people. A small amount of fentanyl kills people. And everybody knows that. And so that group in particular is going to receive a strong response from us. And there was a lot of work done in that case to bring them in here. And I do value the long-term investigation. It can be very effective. So what I'm just saying is that the types of drugs people are sharing that are killing people are just that. They are lethal in nature. And, we're going to prosecute those cases where we have the evidence to do so. There's no question about that.
Okay, that'll conclude our questions, and we just want to thank Milwaukee County DA Lovern for being here in this snowstorm.
Thank you.
And thanks to Aaron, Jenna, and Chris as well. And again, thank all of you for being here. Just need to acknowledge our event sponsors and the Newsroom Pub and Safe House for being the hosting sponsor of this event. If you haven't become a member of the Milwaukee Press Club and you'd like to, you can go to MilwaukeePressClub.org or see Lexi on your way out. An upcoming event, we have Tuesday, March 4th, Dane County Judge and Wisconsin Supreme Court candidate Susan Crawford with the Rotary on that day, and we do have an ask out to Brad Schimmel as well. But that's March 4th, so put that down on your calendars. Again, thank you. Please drive safely back home or to the office or newsroom. Many thanks for coming out in this crazy weather. Thank you.